My daughter texted me 40 minutes before her graduation dinner to say her fiancé's parents would feel more comfortable if I didn't come. I was already in the truck, engine running in the driveway, a bottle of decent Niagara Red wrapped in tissue paper on the passenger seat. I read the message twice. Then I put the truck in park and just sat there in the cold with the heater blowing on my hands, because some part of me thought if I reread it slow enough, it would say something different the third time. It didn't. I'm 68. My name doesn't matter much to this story, but I'll tell you anyway. Walter Holt. I spent 41 years running a sheet metal and HVAC company out of a unit in an industrial park outside Hamilton, Ontario, the kind of place where the parking lot floods every spring and nobody's ever bothered fixing it because the work speaks for itself. My hands have scars from coil stock that'll cut you to the bone if you're not paying attention. I raised my daughter Diane mostly on my own after her mother died of cancer when Diane was 19. I worked through that. I worked through everything. That's what you do. Diane is 30 now. She's a marketing manager downtown, good at it, sharp the way her mother was sharp, and 3 months ago she got engaged to a man named Preston Wickfield, whose family has had money in this province for 3 generations, Old Bay Street money, a cottage on Lake Joseph, the kind of people who say summer as a verb. I liked Preston fine, honestly. He shook my hand hard the first time we met and looked me in the eye, and I thought, okay, this one's not soft. I was wrong about a lot of things that year, but I want to be fair. Preston himself didn't write that text. His mother did through my daughter. I found that out later, and it made it worse, not better. I sat in that driveway a long time. Long enough that the dome light timer clicked off and the cold from outside started creeping past the heater. I thought about going anyway. I thought about marching in there in my good navy blazer, the one I'd had pressed that afternoon at the dry cleaner on Concession Street. The woman there knows me, asked if it was for something special, and standing in the doorway until somebody had to look me in the eye and explain it to my face. But I've fired men for less dignity than that. I've sat across the table from contractors who screamed and slammed things to get their way, and I always thought less of them for it, even when they got what they wanted. So I didn't go in. I turned the truck around in the driveway, the gravel crunching under the tires the way it always does, and I drove home with the wine still wrapped in tissue paper on the seat beside me like a passenger who'd missed their stop. Here's what Diane doesn't know, what almost nobody in her life knows. I'm not the guy who just owns a sheet metal shop. 26 years ago, when steel prices were in the gutter and half the contractors I knew were going under, I started buying up small industrial properties around the Golden Horseshoe, Hamilton, Burlington, out toward Brantford, for next to nothing. Because nobody wanted them, and I understood buildings the way some men understand horses. I leased them back to companies just like mine. I never told Diane the numbers because I didn't want her growing up thinking money grew out of the ground. I wanted her to know what it cost to make $1 before she ever knew how many I had. I drive a 2009 Ford F-250 with 210,000 kilometers on it, and a crack in the windshield I keep meaning to get fixed. People look at that truck in a Whole Foods parking lot and make assumptions, and for 26 years I've let them. I got home and I didn't turn on the lights. I sat at my kitchen table, same table I built myself in '94 oak, a little scarred up now, and I poured myself 2 fingers of rye, the good stuff I keep for nobody, and I thought about my late wife Margaret. She used to say, Walter, you'd give that girl the skin off your back and call it a jacket. She wasn't wrong. I'd co-signed Diane's condo downtown. I was quietly covering $1,100 a month of her car lease through a numbered company, so she'd never know it wasn't really hers, free and clear. I'd put $80,000 into a joint account 2 weeks earlier, the wedding fund, because the venue Preston's mother had picked, some heritage estate out past Niagara on the lake, wanted half down by Friday. I opened my laptop. The banking app glowed blue in the dark kitchen the way it does, and I looked at that pending transfer sitting there. $80,000 authorized, not yet cleared. EFTs in this country, you'd be surprised how much float time there still is before the receiving institution actually pulls the funds, especially with a transfer that size going to a corporate account. There's a window. I'd used that window once before years back to claw back a deposit on equipment a supplier never delivered. I knew exactly how it worked. I want to tell you I felt rage. I didn't, not yet. What I felt was that cold, stone-in-the-gut feeling, the one you get when a structural inspection comes back and tells you the foundation you trusted for 20 years has been cracking the whole time, and you just never looked close enough. I thought about every Sunday dinner, every tuition check for her MBA at Western, every Christmas where I drove 4 hours round trip because she couldn't get the time off, and I thought, too working class to sit at the table I'm paying for. I clicked dispute transaction. I typed the word unauthorized because it wasn't a lie. I'd authorized a wedding I was attending, not one I'd been disinvited from. I hit submit and watched the little wheel spin and then the word canceled appear. and something in my chest unclenched and tightened at the same time. Then I went into the leasing portal for Diane's car, the one under the numbered company Holt Industrial Holdings Limited. I found the line item. I switched the autopay off. The lease would default to her name, and her billing in 30 days, full $1,100 a month. The way it should have been the whole time if she'd really wanted to stand on her own, the way her mother and I always taught her to. Last, I opened an email to my property manager and old friend, a guy named Doug Castellano, who's handled my leases and my legal odds and ends for almost 20 years. I told him to draft a 30-day notice on the condo. I owned the unit outright, had bought it as an investment 4 years back, and let Diane live there at a rent so far under market it was basically a gift, $600 a month against a place that should have gone for $2,200. I told him to prepare it for market rate on renewal, no grandfathering. I told him to send it in the morning. I closed the laptop. The house was quiet the way it's been quiet since Margaret passed, except this kind of quiet had teeth in it. My phone buzzed around 11. Diane. I let it ring out. Then a text. Dad, call me back. My car payment bounced. Something's wrong with the autopay. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't say a word about the text from earlier about uninviting her own father from her engagement dinner. She called because the money stopped, plain and simple. And that told me everything I needed to know about what that $80,000 and that condo and that car had actually meant to her these past few years. I held the power button until the screen went black and I went to bed, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I slept straight through. I was up at 6, same as always, out in the driveway in my work coveralls because Saturday or not, I still go down to check on the shop most weekends, force of habit. I was loading a couple of brake rotors into the truck bed, favor for a neighbor, when I heard tires screech 2 streets over and then closer, that distinctive whine of German engineering pushed too hard for a residential street. And a black Audi I'd paid the down payment on came sliding around the corner and stopped crooked in front of my house. Diane got out first. She was still in her work clothes from the day before, hair a mess, mascara smudged like she'd been crying or hadn't slept or both. Preston got out the passenger side, which struck me. Preston driving her car on a Saturday morning, in clothes that looked slept in. Dad, she said, coming up the driveway fast. Dad, my card got declined at the gas station. The car payment bounced. What is going on? I set the rotors down gently in the truck bed the way you do with anything heavy and expensive, and I turned around and looked at my daughter properly for the first time since that text. Morning, I said. Don't morning me. What did you do? I didn't do anything to you, I said. I stopped doing something for you. There's a difference. Preston had the decency to look uncomfortable. Hands jammed in his jacket pockets, eyes on the cracked driveway concrete I keep meaning to re-pour. Diane didn't have that decency. Diane's face did something I hadn't seen since she was about 16, and I caught her sneaking out. That specific blend of fear and entitlement, like the world had broken a promise to her personally. The wedding fund, she said, voice climbing. Dad, the deposit's due Friday. We need that money. I know, I said. I canceled it last night. The silence that followed had a weight to it I could feel in my back teeth. You what? I canceled the transfer, I said. $80,000 doesn't move just because somebody decided I'm not good enough to be in the room it's paying for. That has nothing to do with the wedding fund, she said, and her voice cracked a little, the first honest sound I'd heard from her in a week. That was about tonight, the dinner. Preston's mom just thought, she just felt like it'd be a smaller, more comfortable, I said. I read it. I read it 3 times and sitting in my own driveway with a bottle of wine I bought because I was proud of you. Preston cleared his throat. Mr. Holt, that text wasn't really. I want you to know that wasn't coming from. I believe you, I said, and I meant it. I don't think it was your idea, son. But you let it go out under my daughter's name, and you got in the car with her this morning instead of staying home and telling your mother to fix her own mess. So you tell me what that says about you. He didn't have an answer for that. Good men usually don't, when you catch them being quiet at the wrong moment. Diane's phone buzzed in her hand and she glanced at it reflexively, then looked back up at me, and something shifted in her face from confusion to calculation, the way it does with people who've never once had to actually fight for something. This is insane, she said. You're acting like a child. Over a dinner. It's not about the dinner, I said. It's about who decided I'm an embarrassment, and how long that's been true without anyone bothering to tell me. You're being dramatic. Nobody said embarrassment. Read me a definition, I said, of a man who isn't good enough to eat dinner with you, but is good enough to write the check for the room you're eating it in. She didn't have a comeback for that one either. She stood there in my driveway in last night's clothes, and for just a second I saw something close to shame cross her face and I almost softened. That's the thing about being a father. The wanting to forgive never fully turns off, not even when it should. Dad, please, she said, quieter now. Just turn the autopay back on. We'll figure out the rest. We have a lot going on right now. You have a lot going on, I repeated. Diane, you have a condo you pay $600 a month for that's worth $2,200. You have a car with payments I've been quietly absorbing for 2 years so you wouldn't have to think about it. You have a man standing next to you whose mother thinks I'm not fit to be in a room with her, and you let that text go out without a single word in my defense. So tell me again what exactly you have going on, because from where I'm standing, you have a life I built for you that you're about to hand over to people who don't think I'm worth the carpet. She went pale. I watched it happen, the color just draining straight out of her face the way it does when somebody realizes the floor they've been standing on was never really theirs. The condo's yours? She said. Has been for 4 years, I said. I figured you'd find that out eventually. I just thought it'd be under better circumstances. You're going to take my home, she said, and her voice broke properly this time. Not performance, actual fear. I'm not taking anything, I said. I'm giving you 30 days notice, same as I'd give anyone, and at the end of it the rent goes to market rate if you stay. That's not punishment. That's just what a landlord does when the favor stops making sense. Preston put a hand on her shoulder. To his credit, he leaned in and said something low I couldn't hear, and whatever it was, it seemed to be trying to calm her down rather than escalate things, and I filed that away. Maybe there was something worth salvaging in that boy yet, even if his mother wasn't worth the trouble. We have to go, Diane said abruptly, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing the mascara worse. We're already late. Preston's parents are expecting us for brunch before the dinner tonight. Go, I said. Tell them the help says hello. That landed. I saw it land. She flinched like I'd actually struck her, and for a half second I almost regretted saying it, almost. But then I thought about the text again, sitting in that cold truck with the wine going warm beside me, and the regret evaporated. They got back in the Audi. Diane was driving this time, hands tight on the wheel, and she pulled out of my driveway too fast, the same way she'd come in, and I stood there in my coveralls watching the car disappear around the corner. I went inside, made coffee, and called Doug. You sound different, he said, after I'd told him about the morning. I am different, I said. Send the eviction notice. Then I need you to pull the file on the condo deed and the lease agreements. Everything, going back 4 years. And Doug, one more thing. I want you to find out everything you can about Preston's family, the Wickfields, quietly. Walter, that's a rabbit hole. You sure you want to go down it? I looked out my kitchen window at the maple tree Margaret planted the year Diane was born, bare branches against a gray Ontario sky, and I thought about every Sunday I'd spent alone since she passed, every dinner I drove 4 hours for, every time I told myself it didn't matter that Diane never quite had time. I'm sure, I said. It took Doug less than 4 hours to call me back, and what he told me changed the shape of the whole day. Preston's father, Richard Wickfield, the man whose name was on half the heritage buildings in 3 counties, whose family supposedly had old Bay Street money going back generations, had been quietly selling off assets for the better part of 2 years. A numbered holding company tangled up in a failed condo development out near Collingwood. 2 liens against the cottage property on Lake Joseph. A line of credit at the bank maxed out and renegotiated twice. The old money was a museum piece, polished up and presented at dinner parties, with almost nothing actually behind the glass. They're broke, Walter, Doug said. Or close enough to it that it doesn't matter. That Heritage Estate venue your 80 grand was supposed to cover? I checked. Richard Wickfield's company has an outstanding invoice with them from a corporate event last spring. $11,000 unpaid for 9 months. They're not lending you their good name for this wedding. They're using yours. I sat with that for a long moment. There's a particular kind of quiet that settles over you when something you suspected gets confirmed in writing. Not surprise exactly, more like the relief of finally understanding why a structure was leaning the way it was. There's something else, Doug said. I had my assistant pull the property records on that condo unit before I send the notice. Just standard due diligence. Walter, there's a second key fob registered to the building security system under Diane's unit. Logged 3 times this month. Goes back to an access card under the name Linda Wickfield, Preston's mother. That's the one. Walter, I think you should go look at that unit before you send anything official. I drove downtown that afternoon with my own master key. The one I'd kept since I bought the place. The one nobody but Doug and the building super knew I still had. I let myself in. The condo was clean, nicer than I'd expected. Diane always did keep a tidy home, that much Margaret taught her, but something was wrong the moment I stepped past the entryway. The wall above the fireplace, where Margaret's painting used to hang. A small watercolor she'd done of the Bruce Peninsula shoreline the summer before she got sick. The only real art I owned, and the only thing in that unit that had ever truly been mine to give, was bare. A clean rectangle of unfaded paint marked where it used to be. My stomach dropped the way it does on a ladder when your foot finds nothing where a rung should be. I walked the rest of the unit. The jewelry box on Diane's dresser, the one that had been her mother's, sat open and half empty. Margaret's wedding band was there, thank God, but the small diamond pendant I'd had made for Diane's university graduation, the one with her mother's birthstone set beside her own, was gone. I found the receipt in the kitchen, tucked half under a stack of wedding magazines on the counter. Like it had been left there carelessly, or like someone hadn't expected anyone to ever look. A consignment slip from a jewelry and fine art dealer on Yorkville Avenue. One watercolor painting, coastal scene, signed M. Holt. One diamond pendant, .75 carat. Total payout, sold 11 days ago. The same week Diane had told me, over the phone, sounding stressed, that the wedding budget had ballooned a little, and that Preston's parents were stretched thin from the venue deposit. I stood in my daughter's living room holding that slip of paper, and I felt something in me go very, very still and very, very cold. Not rage, not yet. Just the awful clarity of a man counting little beams and realizing how many of them had already been quietly removed. I called Doug back. Pull together everything, I said. I want it ready by tonight. Walter, what are you planning? I'm going to that dinner, I said. I wasn't invited, I'm going anyway. The restaurant was a private dining room at one of those converted Victorian mansions out past Jordan. A place with a name like the Pillar and Vine and a wine list that didn't show prices because I suppose if you had to ask. I parked my truck in the circular drive, right behind a row of Mercedes and one very tired-looking Audi that I recognized, and I sat there for a moment in my pressed navy blazer, the one I'd had cleaned for the dinner I was uninvited from, the receipt slip folded in my breast pocket like a man carries identification. A young server tried to stop me at the door, polite but firm, told me the room was reserved for a private party. I told her I was the man who'd settled the deposit for that exact private party, and to go check with the manager if she didn't believe me. She did. The manager came out a moment later, took one look at my name on the booking deposit records, and went a little pale and walked me in himself, apologizing the whole way, because of course it was my card on file for the deposit. That part, at least, had never gotten canceled, since the wedding venue deposit and this private dinner were two separate accounts entirely. The room went quiet when I walked in. Linda Wickfield was mid-sentence, something about how unfortunate it was that Diane's father couldn't make it tonight, family complications, you understand, and her voice trailed off into the kind of silence that has a sound to it, like a held breath. Diane saw me first. Her face went through about 4 different emotions in the space of 2 seconds. Shock, fear, something that might have been relief, and then fear again. Preston stood up halfway out of his chair like he wasn't sure if he should be glad or terrified, which fair enough, neither was I. Dad, Diane said. Evening, I said, and I walked to the head of the table where Linda and Richard Wickfield sat in their good clothes and their borrowed confidence. Mr. Holt, Richard said, recovering fastest standing, extending a hand like nothing at all was wrong. We didn't expect. No, I said. I don't expect you did. I didn't shake his hand. I reached into my breast pocket instead and laid the consignment slip flat on the white tablecloth in front of him, smoothing it out with 2 fingers, the way you'd present a quote to a client who'd been padding their numbers. What is this? Linda said, looking at it without picking it up, her voice already brittle with the effort of pretending she didn't already know. That's a receipt, I said, from a dealer on Yorkville Avenue, for a painting my late wife made with her own 2 hands, and a pendant I had made for my daughter's graduation with her mother's birthstone in it. Sold 11 days ago for $3,400. Want to guess who has access to my daughter's condo and walked out with them? The table had gone completely silent. Somewhere behind me I heard a server quietly set down a tray and back out of the room. This is absurd, Linda said, but her hand had gone to her water glass and it was shaking just slightly, just enough that I noticed, the way you notice a hairline crack in a beam before it ever becomes a real problem. I had the building security pull the access logs, I said. Your key fob, Mrs. Wickfield. 3 visits this month, none of them with my daughter home. I checked before I drove out here because I wanted to be very sure before I said a word. Diane made a small sound, somewhere between a gasp and a sob. Mom Wickfield, you said you were just dropping off the seating chart. I don't have to explain myself to you, Linda snapped. And something in that sharp tone, directed at my own daughter, did something to me that all the rest of it hadn't quite managed. I'd been angry about the text. I'd been hurt about the dinner. But watching this woman speak to my daughter, my Diane who I'd raised on my own through every hard year, who I'd driven 4 hours round trip for more times than I could count, like she was something beneath her, after stealing from her own home, was the thing that finally tipped me over from cold to something harder. You don't have to explain yourself to her, I agreed. You're going to explain yourself to the Halton Regional Police, who I called from the parking lot before I came in. The color drained out of Richard Wickfield's face entirely, and I understood, watching it happen, that whatever Doug had found about that family's finances, Richard already knew it intimately, knew exactly how thin the ice under all of this had gotten, and how a theft charge against his wife, on top of everything else, might be the single push that put the whole thing through. "There's no need for that," Richard said, voice gone tight and fast. "This is clearly a misunderstanding. Linda will return the items, won't you, Linda?" "I don't have them anymore," Linda said very quietly, looking at the tablecloth. The dealer already." "I know," I said. "I went and bought them back myself this afternoon, before I came here. They're in my truck." "That's not the point, Linda. The point is you went into my daughter's home and took something that wasn't yours to sell, to pay for a dinner I wasn't even invited to, hosted by a family that's been pretending to have money it lost 2 years ago." Richard stood up so fast his chair nearly went over. "That's enough," he said, voice cracking on the word enough in a way that told me everything I needed to know about how close to the truth I'd landed. "It's all in writing, Richard," I said. "The liens on the cottage, the unpaid invoice with this very venue, the numbered company tangled up in Collingwood. I had it pulled this morning, same as I imagine you'd pull a credit check on anyone marrying into real money. The whole table was looking at the Wickfields now instead of at me. Guests I didn't recognize. People in good suits who'd clearly come for an evening of admiring Old Bay Street money and were instead watching it dissolve in real time across the white linen." Diane stood up. She was crying now openly, and she came around the table and stood next to me, which I hadn't expected, not after the morning we'd had. "Dad," she said, "I didn't know about the painting, about any of it. I swear to you I didn't know." I looked at my daughter, mascara running again, the same as it had been that morning in my driveway, and I thought about every year I'd spent quietly making her life softer than mine had ever been. And I thought, too, about the cold stone that had settled in my gut the night before, and how it had started to loosen, just slightly, looking at her now. "I believe you," I said. "But Diane, you let a text go out that called your own father not good enough for a room he was paying for. That part you knew." She didn't have an answer. She just stood there, and the silence stretched, and somewhere down the table a man I didn't recognize cleared his throat awkwardly and reached for his wine. I turned to the room generally, because by then everyone was watching and there didn't seem much point pretending otherwise. "My name's Walter Holt," I said. "I run a sheet metal shop in Hamilton, and I drive a truck with 200,000 kilometers on it. And I also own the buildings most of you have probably leased space in at some point without ever knowing my name. I wasn't invited tonight because somebody decided I'd embarrass this family. I think the embarrassment's been sitting at this table the whole time, just better dressed than me." 2 officers arrived about 10 minutes later, quiet and professional, and took a statement from Linda in the hallway while the dinner guests sat in the kind of silence that doesn't get fixed by anyone proposing a toast. I didn't press for an arrest that night. In the end, I told the officers I wanted it on record, wanted the report filed, but I let them know I'd consider whether to pursue charges once everything cooled down, mostly because I looked at my daughter's face and understood that whatever happened to Linda Wickfield next was going to land on Diane too, one way or another, and I'd done enough damage for 1 week. Preston didn't say much that night. He sat very still through most of it, and when I finally did look at him, square on, he met my eyes and said quietly, "I'm sorry, sir, for all of it. I should have said something the second that text went out, and I didn't, and I'm not going to pretend that's nothing. It wasn't nothing. But it was something, and at 68, you learn the difference matters." I drove Diane home myself that night. She left her engagement and the question of that wedding hanging entirely unresolved, which felt right, because some things shouldn't be decided in a parking lot at 11 at night, with your mascara halfway down your face. We didn't say much in the truck. Somewhere around the QEW she put her hand over mine on the gear shift, the way she used to when she was small, and we'd drive to Tim Hortons on Saturday mornings, just the 2 of us, before any of this, money, weddings, families with more polish than substance, had entered either of our lives. "I didn't know who you really were," she said eventually. "Not really. I thought I did. I didn't make it easy to know," I said. "I thought hiding it was protecting you. Turns out it just left a door open for people to decide who I was without asking. We didn't fix everything that night. Diane postponed the wedding by 6 months. Her decision, not mine, though I won't pretend I wasn't relieved. The condo lease I let ride at the old rate after all, because some battles aren't worth winning once you've already proven you could. Preston and I have had a few honest conversations since, the kind men have over a beer in a garage rather than at a dinner table, and I think there's something real there worth giving a chance, separate entirely from his mother's mess. The Wickfields, last I heard, are selling the cottage. That's not satisfaction exactly. It's just what happens when the foundation finally gives out under weight it was never built to carry. I sold the watercolor and the pendant back into a safety deposit box, where they'll stay until the day I can hand them to Diane myself properly, with the whole story behind them instead of a receipt hidden under wedding magazines. I learned something late in life that I wish someone had told me 40 years earlier, standing in my first apartment with a tool belt and a mortgage I couldn't quite afford. Money doesn't buy you respect from the people you love. It just delays the day you find out whether you ever had it in the first place. I spent 26 years building an empire quietly so my daughter would never have to worry. And in doing that, I nearly let her grow up not knowing what worry, or work, or worth actually cost. The wealth was never the thing I should have been hiding. It was the man underneath it, the one in the coveralls, the one who still checks the shop on Saturday mornings, the one who built that kitchen table with his own hands, that I should have made sure she saw clearly, every single day, long before some stranger's text tried to tell her he wasn't good enough for the room.